Hello, everyone. My name is Savannah, and presenting with me today are Amanda and Koshar. I am a web services librarian at the Ministry of Attorney General. Amanda and Koshar are Master of Information candidates from the University of Toronto. Today, we're pleased to present for you CAPAL 2022, the new moderators of wellness, academic librarians in the platform age. This talk first identifies how social media platforms have amplified misinformation and in turn negatively affected the wellness of their users. We'll first introduce the problem and examine the ways in which social media platforms, business models, and governance strategies produce misinformation. We'll then unpack the layers of wellness and connect how misinformation might impact on different perspectives. Highlighting some approaches to combat misinformation, we want to widen the conversation on the need for a joint effort for academic libraries, the government, and social media companies in combating misinformation. So to begin, we'll introduce the problem and look at social media platform and the users. Offering personalized information through attention-seeking notifications, social media platforms such as Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube have grown to be major news sources globally. The business model capitalizing user attention have changed the realm of information landscape. Private values have been emphasized over public interest, including the quality of information disseminated among users. Also, platforms have started to hire moderators and employ algorithms to mitigate the spread of misinformation. The crowd-contributed nature on social media platforms have the unintentional sharing of inaccurate information difficult to moderate. The platform ecosystem tend to be complex and ever-changing. The dissemination of misinformation is especially visible during the COVID-19 pandemic, where social media platforms accelerated the spread. Users relied on personal connection as a heuristic to minimize the cognitive effect to verify and evaluate information pushed to their feed. In our next session, Koshar will unpack the layer of wellness and identify the impact of misinformation on mental and physical well-being. We'll also connect the role of academic libraries with community wellness.
Thank you, Savannah. First, I want to emphasize that social media platforms as tools are not inherently negative, nor are they neutral. They can be used in ways that benefit wellness. During the pandemic, for instance, separated family members and friends turned to video calls mediated by platforms like Facebook to connect and remain informed. Others turned to social media to advertise their businesses and find work after layoffs and closures. However, because of the attention-based platform business model, platforms can be harmful for well-being. In 2017, 51% of Americans received their news from social media platforms, a number bound to increase with further digitization. So, for the sake of our well-being, misinformation on these platforms deserves our attention. We need correct information and be able to weigh against incorrect information to make health decisions. Despite the medical community's efforts to encourage vaccination during COVID, vaccine myths remained rampant from 5G tracking microchips to infertility. Exposure to these claims can be cognitively taxing. Because we are generally wired to pay attention to negative news, misinformation consumed online is often negative. A 2019 psychology study demonstrates that daily exposure to negative news relates to an increase in negative affect. In other words, it makes us unhappy. When misinformation is shared by loved ones, it can be jarring and spur feelings of loss. By breeding polarization, misinformation can also affect social cohesion, weakening familial and societal ties. This has become all too apparent in recent years. In 2020, the World Health Organization declared COVID an infodemic, an app label as many encountered misinformation, including advertisements claiming bleach and malaria treatment hydroxychloroquine to be cures. Misinformation around the origin of the virus also proved particularly detrimental, molding worldviews in ways that led to violence against minorities. Beyond the pandemic, the violent 2021 US Capitol attack too was linked to false claims spread on platforms around the legitimacy of the 2020 American presidential election. Currently, the repercussions of alternate realities that work to generate public support are becoming apparent with the Russia-Ukraine war. These events have only furthered efforts to combat misinformation. In a historical move, the EU announced the Digital Services Act, which pushes platforms toward accountability for the content they host. Scholars from across disciplines, from economics to media studies, have described and explained the mechanics of misinformation. Platforms like Twitch are taking notice, realizing they can no longer position themselves as impartial companies that host content, as they shape content. This is not enough, however. Elon Musk, a self-described free speech absolutist, recently purchased Twitter, raising concerns around the type of popular discourse the platform will support. Ultimately, no one actor can grapple with misinformation. This must be a joint effort, one that can benefit from the work of academic librarians, something that Amanda will go into.
Thanks, Coucher. Now we'll dive into some approaches to combat misinformation that you can consider implementing in your own libraries. The first item is that we must acknowledge that teaching and providing resources to combat misinformation have a limit. On one hand, it can leave librarians feeling burnt out from constantly fighting misinformation on their social media timeline, both in their professional and personal lives. Currently, the onus of combating misinformation is solely placed on librarians, and we argue the effort to combat misinformation should be jointly shared by academic librarians, the government, and social media companies. Librarians are not equipped to combat these issues when advertising and social media giants like Facebook and Twitter design their algorithms to encourage maximum engagement rather than accuracy or reliability. This process requires the government to advocate for academic librarians by imposing regulations and enforcing filters for misinformation by social media companies. With declining trust in the government, politicians, and mainstream media, the spread of misinformation continues to grow, and the role of the librarians as a trusted member of the community hasn't changed. An overarching approach to combat misinformation in academic libraries should be to balance intellectual freedom and unrestricted access to information. And on the other, the primary library service is of selecting, verifying, controlling collections on behalf of users, which is often overlooked. And another consideration is to move beyond the narrative that information is just out there and that signals a loss of control, context, and capacity, and that a librarian's role is to simply prevent it, when we should also consider what information does to our minds by understanding the full extent of the impacts of misinformation and why we are susceptible to it. And it's important to design training experiences and materials that enhance critical thinking by this understanding of when and how people are influenced by misinformation. Looking at an example, LibGuides have played an important role in informing students on how to discern misinformation and fake news during the COVID-19 pandemic. While LibGuides are a great resource to combat misinformation, they can also prove unoriginal if they are only directing students to existing resources on how to combat misinformation. Furthermore, using a checklist approach can appear to be a simplistic approach of identifying misinformation, and it may cause users to rely on the same particular websites which have passed that checklist. A strategy to improve LibGuides are to become integrated by utilizing existing resources in tandem with their own approaches to combat misinformation. It's also crucial to define the terms of misinformation, disinformation, and fake news. So, which solutions can we take away from this talk? In this talk, we presented reasons why academic librarians are uniquely positioned to be the moderators of wellness. As trusted community members with strong information-seeking skills, academic libraries can address the harmful impacts of misinformation by fostering a safe environment to encourage critical conversations. Already, academic libraries are shifting from physical to digital spaces for outreach and communication, promoting their events, collections, and resources. As academic libraries evolve their channels and strategies to best serve their patrons, we invite librarians to reflect on how to navigate the information landscape in today's platform age, strengthen the social connectedness component of wellness, and moderate the dissemination of information, which ultimately contributes to a healthy and sustainable community. And here are some additional references if you would like to further read about misinformation. Thank you for listening to our presentation, and we welcome your feedback and any questions you might have for us.